Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT How to Play video. Today our analysts will be diving into how to play Nightbringer Dragonslayer for patch 11.14. With the mid-set arriving in the next patch, we'll be saying goodbye to the trait Dragonslayer. To commemorate their time in TFT, we're doing a farewell how to play based around the Yasuo carry composition utilizing both Nightbringer and Dragonslayer. We'll cover core items, champions, and traits with a brief overview of each stage of the game. Let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. To begin with, let's go over a few of the pros and cons of playing Nightbringer Dragonslayer. The main reason to run this composition is the strength of Yasuo in the early stages of the game. Particularly if you get him from an early loot orb, you can run him in stage 2, chances are you'll be in a good position to win streak. There's certainly more to it than that, but as far as baseline value goes, Yasuo's got a lot. Once you hit stage 3 and 4 and can 2-star him, you should be good to play through to stage 5. That's where Mordekaiser comes in. Mordekaiser helps shore up the weaknesses of Yasuo during stage 4 and 5. Of course, you'll need items for him in preferably tier 2, but even at 1 star with items, he'll help you win rounds. It's because he gains a lot of AP inherently from Dragonslayer, which you can get up and running at level 7. This also boosts Yasuo, who also gets his own trait active at level 7 with 4 Nightbringer. Lastly, and this is also a weakness, is that Yasuo 3 is a beast in the late game. But that is also an issue with the composition, as Yasuo 2 will fall off once you're hitting the latter half of stage 5 and on. He simply can't survive long enough into compositions like Karma and won't do enough damage to burn through the health and healing of Dawnbringers. Even against Redeemed, he can struggle unless you're positioning far away from Rel. Another weakness of the composition is that Yasuo has been nerfed multiple times in recent patches. While the build is still viable to top 4 with, getting beyond that point can be a bit of a struggle. One last issue is the reliance on bow items. RFC is a must-have if you want to do well past stage 4, otherwise Yasuo is going to constantly deal with melee pathing issues. Rune's Hurricane is also important for spreading damage, and lastly, you usually just want a survivability item like Hand of Justice to add some healing so he survives longer. Basically, he's item dependent to do well once you reach the later stages of the game. All in all, Nightbringer Dragonslayer is an easy to put together composition that can earn you a consistent top 4. It will struggle late game, but that's alright with how strong it can be early on in the game. Let's shift over to talking about how to play the composition, beginning with the core items. The two main item holders for Nightbringer Dragonslayer are Yasuo and Mordekaiser. Yasuo is the main carry, but honestly, both of them are necessary to do well, so you want to prioritize itemizing both if possible. Other than those two, it's common to give utility items to Morgana and Diana depending on what items you have left over. We already touched on this, but items for Yasuo are reliant on having multiple bows. First off, RFC. As we said, it's an essential item to help Yasuo deal with melee pathing problems. Rune's Hurricane comes in second to spread out his true damage, but make sure it's not the Shadow variation. Shadow Runings won't apply on-hit true damage of Yasuo, making it a worthless item on him. Lastly, you generally want survivability with either version of Hand of Justice, Gunblade, or even Guardian Angel. Or you can lean more into damage with Jeweled Gauntlet or Archangel Staff. The last item is definitely the most flexible, though you can get by without a Runins. Your main priority should be definitely to secure an RFC and then go from there. Mordekaiser has less strict rules to follow, though he does have best in slots. Those are Warmog, Hextech Gunblade, and Quicksilver. This combination of items increases his max health, meaning his shield is larger, heals him, and helps him against crowd control. In this case, you can run the Shadow variation of Warmogs and Quicksilver, though it's not required. Other than those items, you can really give him anything that increases his survivability or damage output. Utility items for the composition can be Redemption, Morellonomicon, Frozen Heart, or Shadow Locket. Shadow Locket helps out your early game, and with so many melee frontliners, you'll get a lot of value out of it later on. Frozen Heart is still best in slot for Diana and helps win fights against backline compositions like Karma or Rangers. Lastly, Emblems. The best are of course Nightbringer and Dragonslayer, since it gives flexibility in what champions you can add in. Legionnaire can also work, but none of the other Nightbringers or Dragonslayers care all that much about auto-attacking besides Aphelios, but you don't really want him. Alright, let's talk about the core champions and traits for Nightbringer Dragonslayer. It should be obvious, but the core traits are going to be 4 Nightbringer and 4 Dragonslayer. The beauty of these two traits is that you can fit them all in at level 7, since Diana is both a Dragonslayer and a Nightbringer. You do inadvertently get 3 Skirmishers with the composition due to Lee Sin, but he's often switched out for Darius later on. The core champions will be all 4 Dragonslayers plus Yasuo, Morgana, and Lee Sin. Once you get Darius, you will usually add him in over Lee Sin. After you have those champions secured, you can look to add in utility at level 8. The most common is going to be Mystic, since you already are running Morgana. Both Rise and Kindred are alright, but the best Mystic is actually Lulu. Lulu provides an attack speed steroid for Yasuo. It's not a necessity, but you will notice a difference in having Lulu in at level 8 compared to not having her in. It's possible to focus more on Legionnaire instead of Nightbringer, especially since the trait was buffed in 11.14, but honestly, Lulu does just fine as a replacement for the trait. Besides Mystic, you can try to add in additional Nightbringers if you have an emblem to play for 6 Nightbringer. Or, as we mentioned, you can add in 4 Legionnaire. Ironclad is a bit difficult to fit in, but Rel on her own is also plenty strong if you're lacking in the front line. To keep it simple, just add in a Mystic at level 8. Before we move on, let's talk about the late game transitions you can make with a mid-game Nightbringer Dragonslayer board. Since Yasuo has been nerfed multiple times, it's common to look for potential transitions in the late game. This is not easy to do, but it is possible. The transition depends heavily on your items. If you have a lot of AD items, Aphelios becomes a viable option. Normally, Rangers struggle in the early and mid game and then come together late game, so it makes perfect sense to transition from Nightbringer Dragonslayer into Aphelios, since you should have already been doing well in the mid game. Ideally, you want to make the pivot into 4 Ranger with Nightbringer, but 2 Ranger and 6 Nightbringer is also doable. The best way to make this pivot, though, is by having Darius. Besides Aphelios, there's AP transitions with either Karma or late game Heimerdinger. This is difficult to do well, but possible if you have the economy to slowly switch out your board. Heimerdinger is by far the easier transition, since you can give him all your AP items and then add in Ivern, Volibear, and another Invoker. Lastly, there is the possibility of playing Kayle, but don't rely on this to go well. Kayle is quite hit or miss and should only be your last-ditch effort to put together a late-game board. Now we can move on to briefly look at each stage of the game, beginning with the early game. The opening carousel priority should be Bow. Bow builds into quite a few important items for Yasuo and gives you the potential value with other boards that can utilize things like Static Shiv, Rageblade, or Final Whisper. Securing a bow from the opening carousel will make finding the rest of your components far easier. If not a bow, then look for gloves, since it can be used for things like Hodge or Jeweled Gauntlet. Lastly, there's always Belt for the early game Warmogs, or Rod for Shadow Locket. Moving into stage 1, the champion you really want from a loot orb is Yasuo. But don't fret if you're unable to find him right away, just play your strongest board. Good item holders for Yasuo are Callista or Varus. Otherwise, prioritize typical frontliners like Gragas, Leona, or Hellions. Once you get into stage 2, you generally want to keep on a normal leveling curve, meaning level 4 by 2-2 and level 5 by 2-5. This gives you the best odds of hitting an early Yasuo, as well as other 3-cost units like Lee Sin and Pantheon. Try to play for a win streak, though losing does give you carousel priority, which you may need to secure more bows. Moving on to the mid game, we may need to roll down at level 6. It's not ideal to do so, but a weak early game is devastating for a composition like Nightbringer Dragonslayer, since it's meant to spike in the mid game and fall off later on. So if you're far behind the lobby, roll until you get at least a Yasuo 1 with a few Nightbringers and another Legionnaire. If your board is strong enough to get through stage 3, then the goal is to level to 7 on 4-1 and roll. Again, you don't want to all in here if it's not necessary, but it depends on what you hit and your position in the game. At this point, you really should have a Yasuo 2 and at least a Mordekaiser 1. At this point of the game, you can make the decision to either stay on level 7 or level to 8. In either case, you're going to be rolling for Yasuo 3, it just depends on how close you are to it at the end of stage 4. If you have multiple Yasuo, staying on level 7 to hit it earlier is fine to do. If you're only rolling with Yasuo 2, then going to 8 is better to help hit things like Mordekaiser 2 and Diana 2. It also lets you add in Mystic. Either way, your end goal for the late game is going to be to find Yasuo 3. That's really where the board caps, besides adding in Darius. Level 9 is rarely ever achievable with this composition, so don't worry too much about it. Only consider going to level 9 once you've hit Yasuo 3. Besides Yasuo 3, the most important aspect of the late game is positioning. Making sure that your Yasuo is hitting a weak frontliner is essential to winning fights. This means you want to avoid having him on the same side as units like Rel or Garen. Diana is also a key champion to position well late game, since her ability can win you fights if you ever pull the enemy carry out of position. There's also Trundle and Mordekaiser to consider when positioning. Trundle on the same side as your Yasuo will help ensure an enemy frontliner dies quickly. Mordekaiser is what you want to buy time with in the fight, so keep him on the strong side of the enemy board, meaning matched up against their carry if possible. Between his shielding abilities and whatever healing items you have, he should survive a long time. And the last thing to be wary of is assassins like Viego getting onto your Yasuo. The best way to combat this is to have Lulu or whatever extra Mystic you're running next to him. Since RFC only makes Yasuo range 2 hexes, the common way to position him is behind your front line off to the side. Behind him on the third row, have your extra Mystic there, as this should keep them off of your Yasuo. Overall, the late game is going to be where this composition struggles the most, so don't worry too much if you're having issues winning rounds once you get later into the game. The ultimate goal is to get a 4th and scrap a 3rd or 2nd if possible. As with most composition advice, the best thing you can do is work on improving your early and mid game if you want to place better more consistently in the late game. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. We're sad to see Dragonslayer leave in the mid set, as it has provided some fun compositions to play. Nightbringer is also losing a lot of value in the mid set, which leaves Yasuo in a precarious position. But that's not until patch 11.15, so for now, go out and enjoy playing Nightbringer Dragonslayer while you still can. Let us know in the comment section below which composition you'd like us to cover in our next How to Play video. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future GiantSlayer TFT videos.